One of the biggest challenges Irrational faced when developing BioShock was figuring out a way to retain the feeling of a deep RPG while making the game accessible to a broader console audience. Ultimately, the team succeeded in creating an intricate system of weapon and character upgrades that gave the player choice and customization while keeping the gameplay fast, lean, and engaging. One of the hallmarks of BioShock, to me at least, was that it really blended RPG and sort of first-person action game together in a way that, is sort of standard today, but a decade ago was really pretty revolutionary. And I know for the team, I think at some point it became clear that you wanted this to work on consoles, not on PC, right?
Well, both, yeah.
Yeah. But so the idea of, doing a console game and a PC game, and doing something that sort of felt like a shooter but had much more depth. And I know in some of the early design docs you talked about sort of creating an FPS plus versus an RPG light. What was the difference in your mind between those two?
I think for us, the big difference between System Shock and BioShock ended up being that System Shock was more about your character growth and BioShock was more about the environment. Because with System Shock, we really didn't have System Shock 2. We didn't really have either our team to make enough assets or the visual power to sort of make a really convincing environment. But as we started working on BioShock, the art team was so strong that the ability to tell a story within the environment became the most important thing about the game. And that was sort of not something we thought right at the beginning. That was not really a concept we had. But as we started building things, we could realize that the visual world was the star of this thing. The Rapture was really the star of this thing. And telling the story outside of cutscenes, telling it in the world, so the gamer could discover the story rather than us telling him the story, telling him or her the story. And it was still very much, for the time, I think for the time, quite different than what you had seen in terms of there wasn't a lot of growth in shooters. So It was still, I think, for the time, very, very revolutionary. But I think System Shock 2 was even more ahead of its time in terms of that growth thing, because we defocused a little bit. Primarily, part of it was just figuring out how to do that all on a console controller was very tricky.
I remember even the early demos, and people you see a plasma, you see like a upgraded weapon, people are like, oh, I've never seen that before in a shooter. And that was, when you were coming out of the sort of, the Quake, Doom, Half-Life, where it's like you have, 8 weapons on the keyboard, and you sort of knew what they were, and they weren't going to change. Yeah. Sean, was that something that, from a sort of creative standpoint, was it always clear that that was something you guys wanted to do, or it evolved over time because you wanted to have more depth in the game?
I mean, it certainly evolved over time, and each upgrade path was slightly, had its own unique challenges. Like certainly upgrading the weapons, you had to design a base weapon that didn't feel like crap, still felt like something that you wanted to use, but then the ability to add the upgrades to that, and each of the upgrades can come in any order, so you have to be aware that this, parts A, B, and C could come in at any different time to upgrade the weapon. In a first-person shooter, that's your star. That's the thing that you're seeing all the time. When it comes to other things, plasmids, things that are,
Tonics.
Tonics, yes, sorry. It's been a while.
Come on, Sean.
I know, it's 10 years. Those things were more offloaded to machines that you would then have to interact with, so you're not carrying the inventory around with you. But each of these decisions on how we're going to upgrade the player, it wasn't like a mouse and keyboard. Okay, we can just use the mouse, and you have all these buttons at your disposal.
You could arbitrarily point at a part of the screen really easily, which you could do in System Shock 2.
Yeah, so we certainly learned trial by fire when we were trying to adapt these things to the console at the time.
Yeah, and like having different ammo types and stuff like that. Like we went through numerous iterations of the interface to make it. Like we had the first times we sort of put the interface into play. It was very obtuse and very tricky to get your head around, and we just kept working on it and working on it and working on it because you want to feel like second nature. But we spent a lot of time on that.
What motivated the idea of having so much choice in the way you could sort of play through this game? What was it to give the player a better sense of authorship over the experience, or what was driving that?
I've always liked the idea of giving the player a lot of agency in terms of their play style and experimenting with the play style and trying different things and seeing what worked and didn't work and interacting with the environment. The notion that it's sort of a playground that you get to play around with and imprint your own desire on was great, because I think we were more skeptical about being able to do that with story at the time. In fact, so much to the point where that became almost like a joke. You know, that becomes the meta joke of the game of how little agency you have in your story. But agency in terms of how you play the experience and how you load out your weapons and how you interact with the environment, as compared to most shooters at the time, where basically like you can shoot them with the shotgun or shoot them with the the pistol. That was really important to us. So we spent a lot of time trying to make the world react in a way that you would expect and hope it to react when you tried something.
Right. And some of those system or decisions we made about systems fed back into the narrative, like locking Adam behind Big Daddy and the little sister. Like, you can't get Adam unless you deal with the Big Daddy, which then becomes a roving boss fight, which then becomes another system that I don't know if we planned that from the start or was one of those happy, like, serendipity, like, oh, this decision that we made about putting Adam behind the Big Daddy totally works because now we have a different type of boss fight that you hadn't really seen in other games.
Actually, it was bad. It was the other way, because what happened was originally there was no concept of Adam, and Big Daddy just had money and other treasure on them, like every other splicer. Yeah. And they were so tough, nobody would ever fight them, because why on earth would you go after that guy?
Right, go off a bunch of small splicers and get the same amount,
So we had to come up with a currency that was exclusive to them, because we knew that was where the fun was, right? But we also knew people were terrified of them, and we didn't want to fight them. Yeah. So video game development and system development is a lot like economics, right? In economics, you try to encourage certain behaviors through tax, usually through tax policy. Well, you want business growth, so you lower taxes on certain segments of the business economy, or you want to encourage, people to move into this area, so you make incentives to move in here. We had to make an incentive for players to fight the Big Daddy, and Adam became that incentive. And then once you had this Adam, then you had a new piece of narrative, which they could then incorporate back into the story.
An old tasty Adam I can drink.
Stay away from her, or it is you who will be shot next.
Easy now, Doctor. He's just looking for a wee bit of Adam. Just enough to get by.
I'll not have him hurt my little ones.
Talk a bit about the plasmids and the vending machines and that sort of whole approach to, I guess, what is kind of a tech tree, but, and coming from PC games, used to strategy games and whatnot with very complicated ways of how you would upgrade things. I thought you guys did a really interesting approach to how you made it very accessible to a console audience. How did that evolve? Did you know the vending machines were going to be there from the get-go?
Well, we had vending machines in System Shock 2, so we were sort of lifting that, and I always thought that was a fun notion because it's a affordance that people already understand. They see a vending machine, they know immediately, oh, that's where I buy stuff, right? Yeah. And you also then have to have a shopkeep. When we talked about wanting to make things, put limitations on ourselves so things felt fully believable. Yeah. If we had a shopkeeper sitting there, you can't shoot him. He sits there, he doesn't say anything. Right. And all of a sudden he feels fake. Where a vending machine, the Circus of Values machine, can feel 100% authentic. Right. Despite the fact that it's selling like ammo and stuff like that, which is,
But in an objectivist society where you don't have rules and regulations on that type of thing, it feeds back into the narrative.
But you don't then break the fiction at all by having these characters who sort of don't really live and breathe in the world. So the vending machines became an important part of that. But we still want to give them character, and hence and so that clown image came from a piece of, that image is actually from like a fruit container or something from like the 1940s. Okay. And so we had a book of like royalty-free images, and I saw that image, and I'm like, let's put that clown on it, and we'll call it Circus of Values. And then, we wrote some lines for it, decided he'd be this sort of asshole clown, and then we hired the best actor in the world to play that part. That was me. My biggest Avengers, I didn't cost anything.
I didn't know you were really.
I was a clown. Yeah, I was a clown.
I hear it in my head every day.
My wife hates that voice. She hates that voice.
You can give us a little of it right here.
Welcome to the Circus of Values. She does not allow me to do that, so I'll do it outside of the house. Okay. But it allowed us to have something that felt very rich and very real while being very limited at the same time.
Feel your cravings at the Circus of Values.
And also, the plasmids and sort of the motif of sort of the videos and how you explain sort of what a plasmid was. That was a really fun way, I thought, to sort of explain that. Sean, how did you guys evolve that? Because it was a very artistic approach.
I think those came on pretty late too, because we were developing all these systems, and you make the assumptions because you're dealing with them every day that the player who gets this game is going to understand what these systems are. And we always joke that you can't ship a developer with a game, or you can't expect somebody to have a README file for all of these things. Nobody's understanding what these plasmids are or how to use them. How do we present these to the audience in such a way that they're going to understand what it is fictionally and what it is functionally? It was Rob Waters did a lot of the animations on those, and we sit down and we write out like a little 30-second commercial of what this thing is. And again, because going back to the narrative, this is what would happen in Rapture. People are trying to sell these things, so they would come up with commercials to explain why you need this. Using that as your framework, you can then come up with all of these little gags that people will remember, that have a little personality to them, but I think ultimately in the end weren't that expensive to create, because they're cheap.
I think that one of the most important things about it is we didn't want them to be long, and we didn't have a lot of budget for the art, so we have like a couple of frames of animation in them essentially. And so we had to figure out, how do we message how this thing works in like that? And that's what marketing is, right? It's how do you message how something works? And marketing and tutorializing are very similar things, right? You're trying to get a message across in a very brief period of time in a very snappy fashion. And I think that one of the things that I always felt about games is that tutorials are sort of death. And because they're usually like, you go into a scene and there's like a shooting range or something like that, and
narratively they never really make sense either,
and they're so boring. And so we always try to put a big burden on ourselves of how do we train people while not letting them know they're being trained, and brevity is really important to that. So we had a bunch of art constraints on that, which also led to a bunch of writing constraints, and so those things were like, I don't even know if they were 30 seconds.
Yeah, they were
really short. Yeah, like 15 seconds long. We had to explain a whole plasmid in that period of time, and I think that was a good exercise because it also made the game, it forced us to be concise and to really explain what this thing was like that.
Throw objects at foes. You can even catch grenades and throw them back.
Fontaine nos aprieta cada vez más las tuercas. Nos está exprimiendo y nos saca 80 puntos de nuestra tajada bajo amenaza de entregarnos a Ryan como no le sigamos la bola. Hijo de puta. Viene Sammy G y me dice que está pensando ir a La Pasma. Y al día siguiente Sammy G aparece en un saco en el estanque de sal. No tenemos elección. Si nos quedamos con Fontaine acabaremos en la horca. Si ponemos pies en polvorosa, acabaremos como Sam y G. Tiene que haber otro modo. estuvimos aquí abajo pensando que seríamos parte de la gran cadena de Ryan. Resulta que la cadena de Ryan es de oro, mientras que la nuestra es de las que tiene una gran bola de hierro y se ponen en el tobillo. Él está en Fort Frolic tirándose a modelos. Y nosotros en este tugurio destripando peces. Fontaine promete algo mejor. Es como uno de nosotros, ¿sabes? Como si hubiera trabajado alguna vez en su vida. Dice que nos reunamos con él en su planta de procesado de pescado a las 11. Iré yo, con un par de muchachos. No es que las cosas puedan empeorar mucho más.
Pulsa el interruptor de la cabina de control y déjame entrar. Creo que ya es hora de que nos conozcamos.
Te has divertido, pero ya basta. Si pulsas ese botón, descubrirás lo que significa realmente ser mi enemigo.
He pasado la mañana charlando con esa científica germana. Está bastante perjudicada, desde luego. Como todos esos judíos que sacaron de los campos de concentración. Pero no está totalmente chiflada. Me va a hacer ganar tanto dinero que a mi lado Ryan parecerá un repartidor de periódicos. Solamente necesita unos suministros para poner el tinglado en marcha. Y un amigo que le guarde las espaldas. ¿Oyes a mi familia en el submarino? ¿Hacen algún ruido?
Aguanta un poco más.
Esto está tan oscuro. Ojalá tu amigo pudiera alzar la vista y verte. Quizá pudieras advertirme. Ojalá pudieras ayudarme. Fuera. Salvo quedarte ahí, plantado, y verlo morir.
¡Están por todas partes! ¡No puedo contenerlos! ¡Tengo que retroceder! ¡Saca a mi familia de allí y nos reagruparemos en cuanto podamos!
¡Yo soy una estrella!
Como un asesino y pretendes escurrir el bulto como un ladrón. No eres un agente de la CIA. ¿Quién eres? ¿A qué has venido? Hay dos formas de ocuparse de un misterio. Descubrirlo o eliminarlo.
Sal y dirígete a Arcadia. ¡Por Dios! Ese cerdo irlandés me ha ofrecido un trato. Los entrego a Fontaine y me voy de rositas, así de simple. ¿Cómo sé que ese gordo cabrón no trabaja para Fontaine? ¿Cómo sé que no trabajan todos para Fontaine? Fontaine tiene el Adam y todo el mundo lo quiere. Ryan tiene mucha labia y un buen traje. Incluso aquí abajo cualquier idiota puede ver hacia qué lado se inclina la balanza.
y entonces tira de los hilos. Encontraremos a ese cabrón, lo encontraremos y le arrancaremos el corazón.
Yo vine a este lugar a construir lo imposible. Tú viniste a robar lo que jamás podrías construir. Un bárbaro a las puertas de Roma. Hasta el aire que respiras corre a mi cargo. Pues respira hondo. Así luego podrás recordar cómo sabe.
Ve a la batisfera de colinas ondulantes. Te llevará derecho hasta el mismísimo diablo. Entonces todas las cuentas pendientes quedarán saldadas.
¿Qué esperas, tonto? Es precioso.
Parece que esos pobres diablos han empezado a ver fantasmas. ¡Fantasmas! Ryan me ha dicho que es un efecto secundario del tema de los plásticos. Los recuerdos de un pobre mamón se transmiten a otro a través de las muestras genéticas. Días de agua. Lunáticos. Rebelión. Y ahora puñeteros fantasmas. ¿No es genial vivir en Rapture?
¡Adiós! ¿Hay alguien ahí?
El proceso de potenciación ha sido un éxito. Las babosas solas no podían proporcionar suficiente Adam para trabajar en serio. Pero combinadas con el huésped, ya tenemos algo. La babosa queda incrustada en las paredes del estómago del huésped y después de que éste se alimente, provocamos la regurgitación y obtenemos una producción 20, 30 veces superior de Adam útil. El problema ahora es la escasez de huéspedes. Fontaine dice, paciencia, Tenenbaum. Pronto abrirá sus puertas el primer orfanato Little Sisters y se resolverá ese problema.
Menuda nochecita tengo preparada. Todo está listo. Flores, botella de vino, incluso 2 entradas para el jardín de té. Nada pone más de humor a las pibas que la noche de Arcadia. Ya solamente tengo que pasar por Tripticare a recoger una jeringa médica para asegurarme. He oído que esta no es precisamente la primera vez que Angelina va al jardín de té.
¡Aquí!
Hoy, Arcadia ha quedado cerrada para todo el mundo, salvo para los clientes de pago. El tipo me contrata para levantar un bosque en el fondo del mar y luego convierte un paseo por el bosque en un lujo. Ryan pregunta, ¿no debería un granjero poder vender su comida? ¿Es que un alfarero no tiene derecho a sacar provecho del producto de su trabajo? Ay, empecé a discutir con él hasta que recordé quién firmaba mis cheques. Lo único peor que un hipócrita es un hipócrita en paro.
¡No me toques! Gracias por venir.